When I was in college, I assisted with research in the Adult Learning Lab with a professor who did a lot of research into adult literacy and cognition. That was 7 years ago, and I've been working in software since. I'm concerned about the ways that we're approaching the concept of literacy in our culture. I'm not going to claim to be an expert in literacy, it's just the frame that I entered software development with, and as I've been learning these programming languages, I've been using that context to understand how I interface with my thoughts. One of the things that stood out to me while I was learning under this professor was the cognitive difference in processing that adults take versus children when they're learning how to read. When we're teaching children how to read, it's easier for us to introduce them to the concept of characters and phonetics, like they can recognize letters and see how they combine to make words. Adults who haven't had that groundwork laid are going to have much more difficult times building those pathways. You can kind of look at this like top-down versus bottom-up development, where children can look at the letters and combine them to make words, while adults might recognize words and associate those with sounds. An important thing to note here is that when I'm talking about letters making up words, that doesn't apply to a language like Chinese, which has characters that represent words. One of the most significant elements to literacy is the cultural context in which it arises. For example, my parents grew up with a lot more paper than I did, so their cultural context points towards books as being a more tangible placement of literacy. People who are learning how to read today are using technology. The patterns that they're learning how to recognize come from the devices that they use more than the paper that they interact with. So if I'm using an interface that's designed to be exclusive, like an Apple device, then the shapes that I'm learning how to recognize to interact with those interfaces are not necessarily going to transfer. This is why I'm so intentional about pointing to HTML and CSS, which are languages that you can use to write applications.